Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group. This time with our roundtable and our partner, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer-Ruth Green. She is with Battle Proven Leadership. April Sexual Assault, Minority Health, and Autism Awareness Month.
She hasn't called yet, so just roll it.
Today is Saturday, April 22nd, 2023. Our host is Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Under Productions. And we want to have Miss Ruth on the line with us. She's not quite joining us yet. So we want to talk about some of the things that leadership in this show has uncovered. So some of the things we've talked about in the past is that leadership is particularly important and needed amongst our veterans. So what we want to know is what you guys are thinking about, and also what do you want to see leaders of today do, particularly from our veteran community. We have a website, americashg.org. You can go to our website and also leave comments and also start dialogue with us and also amongst yourselves about what are some of the things you want to see happen in your community. Let us know everything from homelessness to benefits to what's happening with healthcare in the Veterans Administration system. Tell us what you are thinking. Tell us what you want to know about. Tell us what your thoughts and concerns are about the veteran community, and particularly when it comes to leadership, because one of the things that pretty much every veteran at some point has been taught, has learned about, has experienced with, is leadership. That's one of the things that we have been instilled and enshrined to kind of take as a solid honor to be a leader, but then also to show others how to be leaders as well. And that transcends, it goes into lots of different things and lots of different areas around the world and also in our community. So Jennifer, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. So you're Lieutenant Colonel of the Indiana Air Force National Guard and a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. You're a combat veteran of Iraqi freedom and founder and CEO of Battle Proven Leadership. And you've done some great things with your foundation, teaching people how to become leaders in the corporate world. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're very excited for it. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to connect. I've heard the show today, and there's a lot going on. I really appreciate specifically that veterans panel immediately previous, specifically about housing and thinking about the assessor's office and all the benefits that we don't know we could have. And so thank you so much for making people aware. But yes, leadership is definitely a passion of mine. And as we've talked over the last couple of months, we've had the opportunity to talk a little bit about the premise of leadership, and specifically about how it begins with, when the power of love overcomes the love of power. And we talked about the selflessness that's required of leaders. And so if you are specifically focused on being a leader because of prestige or power or position, you're going to fail your people incredibly. But if you are concerned about passion and purpose, and that's what you're driven by, you're going to do a better job. And so, one of the things that I really like to talk about is kind of the definition and roles of a leader. And we've talked, last time about how leaders must fight for their people. And you and I had a little bit of a conversation about combat and ultimately what the scope of leadership is, going into it. Combat specifically as a young person and thinking about the people that are next to you. But then as you continue to mature, you see the realities that your impact, your work, your responsibilities, good or bad, have an impact on history and people across the world, not just your state, not just your nation, but across the world. And so we think about World War II and the scope of, what General Eisenhower was responsible for, General Patton, and we still look at the results of what they've done. Again, good or bad, but regardless, the scope of what you're asking people to do as a leader has an impact beyond just you and your everyday involvement. And so thinking about that scope and then thinking about another role of a leader beyond the fact that they have to understand the scope, it's that the leader has to understand their personal responsibility and own the fact that they're a leader. And so one of the things that I believe is very important for a leader is to eliminate distractions. A leader cannot be the distraction. And I welcome the conversation today just to talk with you a little bit about what your thoughts are on that. Because as we think about, leaders who have distracted us, what are some of the tendencies that they exhibit, and, some of the places where they've failed, and where we've personally failed, perhaps, that kind of draw light on that thought process. But that's kind of what I want to talk about today, just to help our listeners understand how to not be a distraction as a leader.
When I think about I guess it depends on how you quantify or qualify distraction, because, for example, we can look at Jesus. Jesus was a big distraction during this time. Martin Luther King was a huge distraction during this time, and they were great leaders. Oftentimes, and I guess it goes back to what we talked about last time you were here on the show, which is when you see something that's not going right or going in the wrong direction, having that strength and fortitude and the wherewithal and the moral character to step up, and with the courage to step up and say, this is not right. We're kind of going in the wrong direction here. And then, on top of that, looking back at actions and being able to say, okay, like in the military world, oftentimes, and it's different. I know for officers versus enlisted people. As an enlisted person myself, when I was in the military, very rarely did you do what we do in the corporate world, which is you go back and you say, okay, what worked, what didn't work. It was basically follow these orders. You do these orders. It's done. Move on to the next job. In the corporate world, you say, okay, well, we did this. We had this quarter. We had a sales quarter, whatever, and it was good. If it was good, what worked? What didn't work? If it was bad, what worked? What didn't work? Now, what can we do better? Even if we had a great quarter, what can we do better next time around? You're always constantly trying to refine and improve that situation. Whereas in the military, it seems more, at least from an enlisted person's perspective, an officer might have a different perspective, but it seems more of a top-down approach, whereas the orders start at the top and they work their way down the chain, and then your job is to basically, don't ask why, just do or die. So that's kind of that's basically kind of what we kind of what, from my experience, what I've seen. But so distractions to me are necessarily, if it's done correctly or done for the right purpose, might be what is needed. I.e., looking at what happened in just recently in down south. Was it Tennessee or Kentucky? I always get the two states mixed up. Tennessee, where the people spoke up because they were trying to draw attention to something that was really serious, and they were a distraction. But because of that distraction, it gained national attention around something that has not been resolved yet, which is gun violence. And I'm a person that believes. I think guns are. I have no problem with guns at all. I think people should have the right to own guns, but there has to be some kind of responsibility, and we don't see the leadership really on that topic across this country, because we're stuck having to report the same shootings over and over and over again that you don't see everywhere around the world. Not with the frequency that we have. We don't see this type of violence all over the world. Even some of the most violent areas of the world, you don't see mass shootings other than maybe the cartels are doing it in South America, but you don't see that kind of stuff in other countries. So that's my take on it. So what is your take on it?
No, I appreciate that insight. I think going back to the first part of your conversation, specifically with Jesus and Martin Luther King, I would argue they're disruptors. And it may seem like semantics. Why would you say disruptor versus distraction? A distraction is someone who pulls you from the primary mission, but a disruptor says, hey, I see something that's wrong, and we're going to change the system. But to me, a distraction, in my definition and use of it today in regards to leadership, is making sure that you personally are not the one that is causing people to fail in their abilities to follow where you lead. And so I think Jesus was the perfect example of humanity and in the Godhead, in human form, but in his person, sinless, he was a perfect example of a perfect leader, someone who was easy to follow because he didn't yell at you out of place. He didn't, he understood his responsibility to live right, to lead well. And so I think those are the kind of things that I mean by distraction versus disruptor. But yes, they definitely were system disruptors, and those are definitely very needful. And then secondly, when you talked about the difference between the corporate world and the military world, I agree. There are some areas where on the military side, having proper feedback is limited. And the rationale is because maybe failure results in perhaps, people's lives lost. Absolutely. But then when you think about the big picture, if you're not in combat and no one has passed away or something like that, the government will still be funded. And so we have a defense budget of XYZ billions of dollars. And every year, if we spend that money, if we waste that money, if we buy 10,000 TVs or 50,000 trucks, or we buy an airplane that doesn't work, whatever, that's not fully tested, the money will still come. So what is the incentive for continuing to grow and become better? But on the individual level, when you get into different units and you look at operations and how they worked, in the Air Force, every sortie, there's always a debrief. After every flight, you come back and you say, what went right, what went wrong, how do we do better, and how do we stay alive next time? So looking at skills, having frank observations and frank discussions is something that are regularly a part of my military career. And I don't know necessarily whether that's branch specific or maybe rank specific, but in my experience, I've seen a lot of feedback. But when we look at big picture, as a culture, is it something you want every single person involved in? I think as a good leader, you should, but the corporate environment has a lot greater incentive to be concerned. If you lost $1 billion and, you may not be in business anymore, or you wasted $1 billion in money, shareholders are going to have a really big issue with that. Mm-hmm. But the differences, I think, are very clear to that, contrast, like you said, in between the military and the civilian side. And then thinking about, the disruptors, I would say, in regards to the Tennessee 3, yes, definitely brings up gun violence, but definitely brings up the decorum that's necessary, definitely brings up what's required of a representative. And so I don't know necessarily, whether what I understand the story to be with my limited research is that these members were specifically focused on sharing attention to gun violence and their perceptions on that. But then it was the manner in which they did so. So being a disruptor of a system is incredibly necessary for leaders. But I always believe people can be upset with the message, but they cannot be upset with the messenger. And that to me is something that leaders have to understand. And so when they took bullhorns in the midst of a conversation on the floor and said, hey, doesn't matter what's happening, we're going to talk and shout over. Again, this is my limited research and understanding of the situation, and say we're going to shout over and make our voice heard. Were they disruptors? Yes. Were they a distraction? Yes. And leaders can't be distractions. And I think that was the purpose. If you can't handle the...
But one of the things, the reason why, from what I've read, and the reason why what I've heard them say as well, is that the reason why they used the bullhorn is because they tried to raise issues over and over and over again, and there was a pattern of not being heard. People would try to speak up and use the rules of order to try and bring their point to the floor, but they would constantly be shut down and without being able to represent their constituents. The purpose of a person in that position is to have a voice and to speak the concerns of their constituents. They weren't being able to do that, which is why they made the bold action of using bullhorns so they could be heard.
I appreciate that clarification from my knowledge. And again, passing judgment is far beyond me. Again, I wasn't in the room, and the Monday morning quarterback, another person's decision. If you're not heard, what do you do? What are the extent? Is your voice as a representative intended to be used with your voting card? Is it intended to, can you write op-eds? Can you do this? Can you do that? I don't know. And I think if the legislative body isn't one where you can express your ideas clearly or have that time on the floor to have that connection, and that's the step you took, I will not Monday morning quarterback and critique. But in my meager understanding of facts, the decorum and the perception of professionalism, I think, was the piece that really was the bold move that, people were upset and bothered by. So regardless of what side of the line you fall on, one of the things that is very important to me is, and again, I think looking at the Tennessee example, like you shared, that may be one of, one instance in the entire, 250 years of Tennessee's history. Again, I don't know the specific numbers and how long the state's been a state, but 99% of the time, those types of actions, I think, become a distraction. However, and regardless of whether it's right or wrong, I'm not making, again, a judgment to that end. But I do think that as you're leading people in general, your personal conduct matters. And that's the thought process. And so when I think about leadership and the requirement of leadership not to be a distraction, I think it's important to ensure that you know all of the tools at your disposal. And because when you get better, then when a leader gets better, everybody gets better. And so when I have the opportunity to grow, to learn what tools are at my disposal, perhaps in a political arena, perhaps in a CEO arena or in a boardroom, what can we do to tighten up on our spending? How much can we spend to get more, accountants in the room or better advertising, whatever it is? When you are educated about the tools at your disposal and you get better, everybody gets better. And so the personal onus of leadership is my thought process when we think about distractions today. And so, another thought when I think about, some of the best leaders I've known, one of the fallacies that I think we fall into, whether it's the military or corporate arenas, is that we continue to focus on promoting people who are the best doers. And I'm very intent on helping people understand that there's a clear difference between managing and leading. Mm-hmm. You manage things and you lead people. Mm-hmm. And it seems like semantics again. Why do your words matter? Why this diction as opposed to, just letting it all be kind of generalized? Oh, you lead, you manage, you're a manager, you're a leader by default. I think it's important to draw a quick line between those, and I'd like to take a second to explain my thoughts on it. But when you manage a process, I'd like you to kind of think of and imagine if you're looking at hot sauce coming down a conveyor belt, and you have a label that you're slapping on it, whether it's Frank's hot sauce or, Louisiana hot sauce, and you are managing the process. This hot sauce bottle comes down, it's full to the top, slaps a label on it, the machine does, and let's say the machine label slaps that label on upside down. Well, you got to take that hot sauce bottle and toss it. And then the next one comes down and it's okay, that's a good one, that's a good one, that's a good one. Oh, okay, well, look, this one's only half full. All right, take it out and you toss it. And so you manage that process. You make sure the machine functions. You make sure at the end of the day you have a solid product that you're pushing out. Everything looks standardized and everything's acceptable. Well, that's managing the process. Well, think about leading people. If you come in to work and let's say someone's late and you say, okay, you're on time, this person's on time, this person's on time, this person's late. And then sometimes we go straight to where we want to throw the person out proverbially. And whether that occurs because it's like, all right, 3 lates and you're fired, or I'm looking at you and I'm going to, have a discussion with you and yell at you, or whatever it may be, however you choose to discipline in your disciplinary style. But if you choose to manage that person, then you're consistently looking at, okay, on time, Billy's late, on time, Sharice is late, then you function differently.
Sharice.
Whereas if you lead someone, go ahead, one more time for me.
I said Sharice being late again. Oh, my God.
Oh, yes. We all know it's Sharice. No, I'm just kidding. But if you lead people, then you'll look at Brian, you'll look at Sharice as individuals, and you'll pull Brian in and say, hey, Brian, you were late today. Can you talk to me about what's going on? And if Brian comes to you and says, hey, look, boss, I know I'm late, but my wife and I were having trouble. I moved out. She has a night shift, can't get the chance to take the kids. I now have to commute home to grab the kids from my spare apartment, bring them to school. It makes changes to my day, and I can't be on time. Well, what is Brian's response going to be if you say, hey, I understand. It happens. Come in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we'll start your day at 9 and you leave at 5 instead of coming in at 7 and leaving at 3. That way you can, if you can make that work, that's great. Or if you can't, let's do a half day on Saturday to make up some of the hours so you can be in time to take your kids to school and bring them home. Whatever you need, we'll make it happen. And if it's possible as a leader, Brian's response to you is a lot more receptive because you've tried to lead and understand based on where he is. And so sometimes we get confused about managing and leading, and we cannot manage people because it's a mindset that allows us to just toss people out because they don't fit the required rules or system or expectation of the end product we're trying to achieve. And the end product may be good, and it may be ideal when you're thinking about, I want a good worker who does good work, who comes to work every day on time. Those are all good things, but you can't manage people. You have to lead them. And so Brian is led, and Brian is led, and Brian will respond in a lot better way. And so when I think about leading versus managing and making that clear distinction, I think it helps us to kind of think through how we as leaders have to internalize what leadership is and what leadership isn't. And one of the things that leadership is definitely making sure that you take care of people and understand their concerns.
I think a lot of managers and a lot of supervisors and people that are leaders would say that you have to do both. You have to be a leader and a manager, particularly when it comes to personnel, because at some point, not everybody responds to leadership. And then going back to the point of whether you're a distraction or whether you're a disruptor, it's hard to disrupt without being a distraction. Your whole sales department is trained to be a distraction. That's how they get sales, and they have to grab people's attention. In order to do that, typically they got to distract people because everybody's doing their thing. Everybody's in their life. They're picking up the kids. They're going to work. They're getting their coffee and getting their groceries. You got to butt in some kind of way to get their attention. And typically the way they do that is by being some kind of distraction. And then hopefully you can turn that distraction into an attraction to keep their attention. But the thing of it is that I think to your point though, there has to be a balance between leadership and management, because the people at the top think of like a sports team, for example, and that's going on a lot in the NFL and the NBA. There's all kinds of changes going on around the sports leagues, where you're just looking at owners. For example, look at the Washington Commanders. They're looking for a new owner because that owner was really a horrible manager. However, they've had some great leaders in the organization, coaches and things like that. The coach is not the same thing as the owner. The general manager is not necessarily the same thing as a manager that owns the organization either. But there is a balance between leadership and management. A coach has to manage a game, has to manage a team, has to manage personnel at some point. Besides just saying, okay, well, I'm gonna lead you. They have to educate, they have to teach, they have to train. That goes from the corporate world. But I think the military perspective as to what we are taught in the military, as far as leaders, we're taught to follow leaders. We're taught to look up to leaders and also taught to be leaders. But we're not necessarily, at least at an enlisted level, we're not really taught sometimes very well, I think, of being managers and managing different things. And that's probably when everybody's been in the military. It's great from the outside as the military looks as a well-tuned, well-oiled, well-greased, machine that never has a flaw, never has a hiccup. Everything runs like clockwork on time. People show up exactly at formation, exactly on time, all the time. We leave in a road march all the time, on time. Every plane takes off from an aircraft carrier on time, every time. We know that's not the real story. If you're in the military, there's a lot of hurry up and wait. There's a lot of stuff that just does not work that way. That's the management part of it. But with something so big and so huge, and probably the most powerful organization. I mean, I can't think of any other organization that's the most powerful organization on planet Earth in the solar system. The most powerful organization in the solar system has to be the United States military. It has to be. So that being said, I mean, it does remarkably well for how complex it is. But that management part of it, I think, is so critical in order to be to make an organization run effectively. But leadership, on the flip side of that, is critical. It's a totally different skill set. To your point, I agree with that 100%. It's a totally different skill set. You could be a great manager and a horrible leader, and you're going to have some problems. And you can be a great leader but a horrible manager. I think Donald Trump might be a great leader. He can get people riled up. He can get people to burn down the Capitol building, but he can't. He's not a great man. He's a horrible manager. He's horrible. He's a horrible manager. And if you watch The Apprentice, you could see that. But the thing of it is that but that's the whole thing. I mean, so to your point, I think leadership. I think there's a spectrum and a balance you have to find, but also understanding who you are. Are you a leader or are you a manager?
Yes, makes good sense. And in a couple closing comments, I think that self-perspective, that introspection is so important. And managing a company, leading a company, you're absolutely right. It requires different skill sets. And my emphasis was mainly perhaps elementary, but creating a difference between managing things and leading people. And you manage processes. And you're absolutely right. You could be a good manager and a poor leader, or a good leader and a poor manager. because at the end of the day, you still have to get those bottles on the line. You still have to get Louisiana hot sauce out to the market, and you still have to get sales done. And so you're going to have to keep track of those and make sure that's squared away. But you do have to be concerned with the personnel element. And if you try to, and this is the only difference I'm making, if you try to manage people by not being caring and concerning about their person and strictly focusing on the function that they provide, people will not respond well to that.
And I can agree with that. So I got to cut you off because we're getting ready to run out of time.
Thank you.
We got to close the show out. So thanks for coming on. I could talk to you about this for hours. We can go on for this for a long, long time because we have brought some great points up and some things I think people can look at on YouTube and also on Facebook and also on our America's HG website. Jennifer-Ruth Green, Lieutenant Colonel, Indiana Air Force and Air National Guard. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. God bless you.
Now, this is America's Heroes Group, and we had a great show today with 4 great guests. Once again, as always, Glenda doing her job out in where she's at, taking care of business and things, making sure we have the great guests on our show every week. And every time we do talk to these guests, they have some great information to give us. But go to our website, americashg.org. And also, if you have any comments or concerns, make sure you reach out to us through our website. You can also reach out to us through our phone number, which is, as I reach into my bag and pull out the card I should have had at the beginning of the show. And I got to get my glasses on because I can't see with much. And everybody's mad because I'm running out of time. So reach us at 312-803-2618 and also email us at info@americashg.org. Thanks for your time and thanks for being a great audience. Military veterans, we love you. See you next week.